It is the Resistance Report for April 20th, 2017. How time flies when Trump is your president. Tonight's theme, again, in an effort to pull together random strings and stories, but to give you context. Tonight's theme is dubious record-breaking. And I chose dubious record-breaking because it's important to keep in mind that the Trump administration really is an outlier. It's weird. It's important not to normalize any of this, even though there are enormous temptations to try to normalize. For example, and you want to keep this date in mind, Trump's first 100-day mark, when he completes his first 100 days, is going to be reached a week from Saturday on April 29th. Now that date, 100 days, is a symbolic watershed for every president because Franklin D. Roosevelt accomplished so much in his first 100 days in 1933. Now that's not a fair comparison. We were in the middle of a terrible depression. Franklin D. Roosevelt had a mandate to get a lot done. Nevertheless, the first 100 days has been a metaphor for when presidents have the most opportunity to get things done, especially when they have both houses of Congress under the same party that they are. So Donald Trump needs to measure up to something. And even under his own measures, in terms of what he has done, or what he promised he would do, he has done almost nothing. Now, I don't find that terribly problematic because most of what he wanted to do, I personally thought was not very good. In fact, it would be horrible, much of it for the nation. But nevertheless, even in terms of his own promises to his own supporters, he has got almost nothing done. He's also managed to get substantially worse ratings for his first months in office than any president dating back to World War II, according to Gallup. Now, Gallup did not do these surveys before World War II, so it would be fair to say that he has substantially worse ratings in his first months of office than any president in history, but that is not quite fair because we don't know before World War II. What we do know is that he has the record. Donald Trump has the record for the worst public opinion of any president since World War II. His average rating since Inauguration Day is just 41%, making him the only president in history to actually fall short in his first months of office, first 100 days, of a majority approval. And by the way, another reason that first 100 days is so important is that it's at the beginning of a presidential administration when you get most approval. That's when you have the wind behind you. That's when the public is most likely to be supportive of what you have wanted to do. Donald Trump did not get a honeymoon. At 41%, he's very, very low. Bill Clinton, the next lowest ranked, had an average approval rating of 55% for that same first 100-day period. George W. Bush enjoyed a first quarter rating of 63%. This coming April 29th, by the way, is also going to be the time when the federal government will run out of money. I want you to keep that in mind as well, because Congress is now on recess. They've been on recess. This is the second week of recess. When they get back from recess next Monday, they are going to have to do something about this. That should be, hopefully, their first priority. I'm not sure it will be. Reaching agreement on a measure to keep government open past midnight on April 28th. Well, I would hope they would do so, but you remember, as I do, that Republican leaders in Congress occasionally have used that deadline as an opportunity to use a little brinksmanship to get what they want, to threaten that if they don't get what they want, then they'll close government. That's the way Republicans behaved when they were not in power. That's the way they behaved when they didn't have the presidency. It's the way they behaved when the Democrats had a lot of clout. But now, I hope somebody reminds the Republicans that they run the whole shebang. They have the presidency, and they also control both houses of Congress. So if they're going to say, in effect, and some of them are already threatening to do this, believe it or not, that if we don't get what we want, we're going to close government down. They're speaking to themselves, essentially. They have enough votes to get anything they want to do done. They have the presidency. Do you get my drift? So that if anybody is to be blamed for a government shutdown or government not having the money to simply go on paying Social Security checks or doing everything else it needs to do, that blame ought to be right squarely on the Republicans. If they can't get the votes, it's their fault. And the fact that Donald Trump is reaching his 100th day in office as the most unpopular president with no achievement to show for himself is also, in large measure, the Republicans' fault, don't you think? Another record for Trump, the Office of Government Ethics, has just shared a really, I find, quite astonishing measure of public alarm over Trump's ethics. Now, even though he hasn't managed to get very much done, if anything at all, he has managed to get a lot of people very concerned about his violations of ethics. I'm talking about his refusal to release his tax returns, his continuous involvement in his businesses, his secretly issued ethics waivers to some staffers, travel to his private resorts paid for by you and me, financial benefits from foreign governments. The list is very, very long. Now, here's the statistic and the interesting measure. During the first quarters covering Barack Obama's first election, and from his inauguration right through the first 100 days, the Office of Government Ethics had a total of 733 inquiries from the public about Barack Obama administration ethics. 733. During the comparable period for Trump and the Trump administration, the Government Ethics Office has received 39,105 inquiries. So we're into record-breaking territory here, folks. That's an increase of 5,200%. At least Trump can now claim accurately that he's beaten Obama on something truly important. He's more than beaten Obama. There's no contest here at all. Here's another record. The $107 million that was contributed by wealthy people to Trump's inaugural is also, turns out to be a record. Computationist Today showed. The previous record was set by Barack Obama, who collected $53 million. Now that's about half of what Trump collected. The real issue, of course, is what Trump and his donors exchanged for that $107 million. Trump donor, Las Vegas gambling billionaire Sheldon Adelson, who gave $5 million. Now, what did he get? Well, probably the same thing as Phil Ruffin, who's another casino mogul who gave $1 million. And what do they want? What do the casino moguls want from the Trump administration? What they want is actually what they've had already. They want a continuation of no competition from internet gambling. They want to minimize the competition to their casinos from internet gambling. Oh, also, 7 NFL team owners kicked in $1 million apiece. And what did they get? Well, I expect that they're going to get Trump's help in maintaining their monopoly. Those NFL franchises are, after all, monopolies. And, oh, by the way, Trump also plans to name the New York Jets' Woody Johnson to be America's ambassador to the United Kingdom. I mean, it's only logical. If you pay $1 million for the inauguration and you run a major NFL team, then you have enough ability and insight and competence to be the ambassador to the Court of St. James. Do you follow that? I don't. Trump promised to drain the Washington swamp. Well, another record. The swamp smells worse than ever. This may be a record book eligibility statistic. It's not exactly Trump. It is related to Trump. But it also has to do with this weird administration and also weird Congress we're having. Remember, the Republicans tried for 6 long years to come up with a replacement bill for Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. And then they have had months since Donald Trump was elected president, and certainly after he was inaugurated, to come up with a replacement. They still haven't come up with a replacement, but they're still trying. This will be try number, well, I don't know whether it is. Number, what? What is it? 14, 15, 16? They have come up with a tentative plan. Another one. The idea is to satisfy the far-right Republicans who want to repeal the Affordable Care Act, as well as the centrist Republicans who want to keep part of it. And how have they done this? Well, the idea is that they would allow states to do what they wanted. Some states, if they wanted to, could keep the Affordable Care Act in place, and other states, if they wanted, could just throw it into the trash bin. I mean, the language is fancier than that, but this is essentially what the Republicans have come up with. The 2 key features: number 1, the states can decide whether they want to abide by the uniform minimum benefits that are in the Affordable Care Act. A state could decide, for example, under this new Republican plan, we don't want to require insurers to come up with any minimum uniform benefits. And secondly, a state could decide whether they wanted to require insurers to insure people with pre-existing conditions at the same price as everybody else. Now, what the Republicans are saying is that their plan will still require insurers to cover pre-existing conditions, but not at the same price as everyone else. Insurers can set their own price. There's the rub, because people with pre-existing conditions are much more costly, which means that if insurers can take them out of the insurance pool and set a price, a premium, copayments and deductibles, most will not be able to afford insurance. That is tantamount to not getting insurance or not being offered insurance. It's a sneaky way of doing it. According to a new study from the Center for American Progress, this would result in huge premium increases for people with pre-existing conditions in states that choose to opt out of the current system, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. The GOP plan, the Republican plan, would keep in place their former plan's phase-out of the Medicaid expansion. Now, this is important because this is the thing that spooked a lot of the so-called moderate Republicans. They had a lot of their constituents were in need of the Medicaid expansion, had got used to the Medicaid expansion. Now, by getting rid of the Medicaid expansion alone, according to the Congressional Budget Office, that would take 14 million Americans off health insurance. That would basically eliminate health insurance for 14 million Americans. So this is what the Republicans are planning. And this is serious. This is not just an idle plan. They want to get this done before the 100-day mark so that they can have something to show. And Donald Trump can have something to show. And the Trump administration, the Trump White House, Donald Trump has been telling Republicans, you have got to do this before the 100 days are out. So it's scheduled for a vote for next week. Believe it or not, they're trying again. And this is a version that is in many ways crueler than even the last version that they tried. It's a high-stakes political gamble with millions of people's lives. And what is the purpose here exactly? The underlying purpose is so, number one, the rich get a big tax cut and the healthy don't have to pay for the unhealthy. That is what we are talking about here. Another dubious record, I just can't help bring this to your attention if you are not aware of it already. It has to do with our Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, who is not the brightest or smartest spark plug in the world. Maybe he is. He's just a little bit devious. He said, and this is what he said in an interview yesterday. I just picked it up. He was suggesting a judge from Hawaii, which he dismissively labeled as an island in the Pacific. Well, it is several islands in the Pacific. He says that a judge from Hawaii should not be able to strike down Trump's travel ban. This is exactly what he said. Here's the quote. "We are confident that the president will prevail on appeal, and particularly in the Supreme Court, if not the Ninth Circuit. So this is a huge matter. I really am amazed." This is Jeff Sessions, your Attorney General and my Attorney General, Trump's Attorney General. "I am really amazed that a judge sitting on an island in the Pacific can issue an order that stops the President of the United States from what appears to be clearly his statutory and constitutional power." Well, somebody really does need to inform the Attorney General, first of all, that Hawaii is not just an island, or not just a group of islands in the Pacific. It is actually a state of the United States. It's been a state, Mr. Attorney General, since 1959. I'm old enough to remember when it became a state, along with Alaska. And Mr. Attorney General, Alaska is not just some place way up there past Canada that has a lot of glaciers. That is also a state. The other thing that somebody ought to tell the Attorney General is this just wasn't a judge from Hawaii. It wasn't a Hawaiian judge. He's a federal judge. He's a judge that's part of the federal court system. Do you understand that? So, the other thing that somebody ought to tell Jeffrey Sessions is that Hawaii does have several ports of entry. In fact, it's a major port. And Hawaii is not irrelevant to the issue of travel bans. So, Mr. Attorney General, you really do need to know a little bit more of American geography and the Constitution. I don't mean to be snarky. Speaking, though, of snarkiness, Bill O'Reilly is out at Fox News, as you know. But what exactly happened to the corporate culture at Fox? I mean, all the press has been paying attention to Bill O'Reilly, but I just want to spend a moment while we're talking about failures and records for failures on Fox News. Fox tolerated O'Reilly's sexual harassment, as you know, helped pay off women who complained as long as they would not talk about it. Fox News has also bred other sexual predators and protected them, such as Roger Ailes. Now, who oversees all this? Yes, you're right, it's Rupert Murdoch. And he has a history, an MO, of not doing anything in terms of what he should be doing until he absolutely has no choice. You may remember, some of you, that in 2011, charges were levied against Murdoch's News of the World, that tabloid, for phone hacking and bribery in order to get stories. Remember that? What did Murdoch do? He did nothing. He held on until he had absolutely no choice, and then what did he do? He just closed the newspaper. The firings of Bill O'Reilly and Roger Ailes follow a very, very similar pattern. It follows exactly the same script. You do nothing, you pay off the people that complained, and then when you have absolutely no choice, you do what you have to do, but you pay them off too. I mean, Roger Ailes got a nice bundle of money when he left, $40 million. That's a pretty good severance payment. And the news is that Bill O'Reilly is getting $25 million. Also pretty good, considering that you're being booted out for illegal behavior, sexual harassment, and it's already cost you and Fox News $13 million. Sometimes I think we don't, in our culture, in our society, any longer honor or shame the people that deserve to be honored and deserve to be shamed. And I would just like to reserve shame tonight for Rupert Murdoch. Oh, speaking of which, Ann Coulter is back. one day after it canceled her speech here at the University of California, Berkeley, the university now says it will permit her to speak. The chancellor has found, quote, an appropriate, protectable venue, and I'm very glad of that. Your questions. Daniel Kilman, no matter what extent to which it is determined that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia to sway the 2016 election, isn't it still possible that a GOP-controlled Congress could still choose not to prosecute as an impeachable offense? Daniel, you're absolutely correct. In fact, I've been saying all along that one of Trump's strategies is to not only deflect attention from the core issue of potential collusion with the Russians to interfere in our election. I can't imagine a more treasonous behavior, but also to make it so confusing, to make it seem so partisan, that if and when the FBI actually does come up with proof, Trump will just say, well, it's just the Democrats, or he will disguise it in so much fog that he might even be able to get away with it, in the sense that if the Republicans still control the House, they may not prosecute. Karen Eaton, I believe that extremist presidential candidates result from our rule that a voter can only vote for their own party's candidate. If Democrats could weigh in on Republican nominees and vice versa, we'd see more centrist, moderate choices. What do you think? Well, Karen, in some states, and the states have the constitutional right to decide how their voting is going to be done, in some states, Democrats and Republicans participate in the same elections for Congress. I don't think there's much evidence that that results in more moderation. Nevertheless, if you look at what those states do, they are open primaries. I want to also suggest something else, Karen, to you and others who are watching and listening, and that is, if you are a Democrat and you are very lonely, you're in a red state that is where there's no probability, there's no possibility that a Democrat is going to be elected, I want you to at least consider, and I know some of you are uncomfortable with my suggestion, but I'm going to say it again, at least consider registering as a Republican and supporting a moderate in the primaries. Mark Tammy, what do you think is the likelihood of the rest of the Democratic Party following Bernie's lead and rejecting large campaign donations? Mark, I don't think the likelihood is very high. I think the Democratic National Committee and many Democratic office holders, unfortunately, are organized around procuring large donations. But having said that, I also think it would be a great idea. I have told people who are running for the head of the Democratic National Committee that they should limit donations, limit contributions. That would be one sign that the Democratic Party is not under the control of big contributors. I've made the same suggestion to the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, that's the House fundraising group, and also to the Senate, Democratic Senate Campaign Committee, because it's very, very important that people have confidence that Democrats are going to be working for average working people and not for campaign contributors. Eileen Lyon, what advice do you have for the Democratic Party leaders to win back the seats in 2018? Eileen, I think that they ought to focus on two things. Number one, Trump's failure to improve the situation economically of most people in this country in terms of jobs and wages and economic security. And he isn't, and he won't, and nothing he's planning will. But that's not enough. Democrats also ought to come up with their own plan. And I wouldn't say a long list, not a laundry list, not 10 or 15 things. I would say just a handful of things. For example, I would say the Democrats would be doing well to campaign on a major infrastructure plan if Trump doesn't get it done, but also expanding a wage subsidy and also raising the minimum wage. and also making it easier for people to unionize, and also providing an unemployment insurance system that really does pay people enough to get by when they are unemployed and helps them get a new job that pays as well as the old job and gives them insurance if they have to settle for a new job that pays less than the old job. I mean, 3 or 4 things like that. Also, Democrats ought to be saying that they will take the cap off of the amount of income subject to Social Security taxes. That's a good way to save Social Security. And finally, Democrats really do need to get serious about a single-payer plan for health insurance. It is so much cheaper and better and more efficient and will go so much longer a way to preserve and protect the public's health and individuals' health. Raymond Russell, how should the Democratic Party deal with Democratic candidates who oppose universal health care? Primary them out, or make a promise platform of vital progressive pieces of legislation that Democrats and independents can rally around? Raymond, I think, as I was saying a moment ago, but in a slightly different way, it would be important for progressives, and I don't want to limit it to people that call themselves progressives. I want to invite Republicans and conservatives as well, because this is in all our interest, to get behind something like single-payer health care and ask candidates whether they support this, and push and support primary candidates in Democratic primaries, and maybe even Republican primaries, who would support something like this. I say even because eventually it's going to come to pass. I mean, eventually, and it is inevitable. We can't continue to pay just about 20% of our entire gross national product for health care and have most of it go to private for-profit health insurers who are paying out huge executive salaries, who are paying shareholders huge premiums, and the money not going to where it should be going. 2 more questions. Joan Sorensen. Since the largest party in the United States these days is that of the non-voters, how can we get these people to vote? How do we convince them of the importance and reality that every vote counts? Well, Joan, we're never going to get everybody who's been a non-voter to vote, but I have heard just in the last almost 100 days from a lot of people who have not been voters, they are part of that huge party of non-voters, that they are definitely going to vote in the midterm elections in 2018. And why are they already revved up? Because they can see the consequences of not voting. Now, not everybody is going to be a political activist, a citizen activist, but everybody needs to understand the consequences of voting and the very terrible consequences, such as we've had, of many people not voting. We get into office somebody like Donald Trump. Rachel Schaefer, how can we make our resistance nonpartisan? I'm not resistant to a party. I'm resistant to hate and insane policies. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's absolutely critically important to get Republicans and independents involved. Because if this continues to sound like a partisan set of complaints about Donald Trump and the Trump administration and conflicts of interest and Russian interference and so forth, as well as constitutional encroachments, if it's just Democrats complaining about this, then Donald Trump can turn around and say this is just partisan stuff. So I urge you, as part of your outreach efforts, whether you are a Democrat or an independent, to include Republicans. Your indivisible.guide.group, get Republicans involved. Find them. Use whatever methods you have. Maybe you have some Republican relatives. Maybe you know some people who are Republicans. Maybe you are a Republican. If you are, get involved with an indivisibleguide.com group. Which reminds me, today is Thursday, tomorrow is Friday. I have a surprise set of guests coming in Monday that you will be very interested in hearing. I'll tell you more about them tomorrow. I want to thank you again for being with us tonight. I want to thank producer Yale Bridge and also associate producer Sasha Lightman for their help. And again, thank you for keeping the faith, for being actively involved, for not becoming worn out, for not normalizing what is abnormal right now, and even in times like this, maintaining an optimism. We will win. That's the end of the Resistance Report tonight. See you tomorrow.